Rachel had surrendered the pain she could no longer carry alone, but surrender did not mean the marriage was healed. It only meant she had stopped pretending she could fix it by herself. Now Marcus had to face what his silence had protected. And Rachel had to decide what love looked like when trust had been broken. Marcus did start a recovery group, but not immediately. First, he dragged his feet, missed one meeting, claimed he could handle things privately. Then Rachel reminded him, without raising her voice, "Private is where this survived." That sentence stayed with him. 2 months later, after the emergency session, Marcus attended his first group. He did not come home transformed. There was no movie scene apology in the doorway, no sudden passion, no miraculous reset. He came home quiet and embarrassed. Rachel was making tea. "How was it?" she asked. Marcus stood near the kitchen entrance. "Hard." She nodded. "Are you going back?" He hesitated. Then he said, "I think so." Rachel accepted that answer for what it was. Not enough to rebuild a marriage, but maybe enough to begin telling the truth. Rachel and Marcus were still separated inside the same house when Marcus noticed something one evening. She was standing at the sink washing a mug and the light caught her wedding ring. "You still wear it," he said quietly. Rachel looked down at her hand. "Yes." Marcus stood in the kitchen entrance, unsure what to do with that. "I thought maybe you would have taken it off by now." Rachel dried her hands slowly. "This ring means I took my vows seriously," she said. "But it does not mean I'm going to pretend everything is okay." Marcus looked at the floor. "So what does it mean?" Rachel looked at him, really looked at him. The fear in his face was real. So was the damage behind them. "It means I'm still here," she said. "But I'm not here the same way." He nodded slowly. "I don't want to lose you." Rachel's voice softened, but it did not bend. "Then don't make losing me the only thing that scares you. Be afraid of staying the same." Rachel touched the ring on her finger, not to comfort him, but to remind herself. Commitment did not mean silence. Love did not mean self-erasure. And staying, if she stayed, would have to come with truth. Marcus looked away. For once, Rachel did not chase his eyes. There was a time she would have turned that moment into a speech. She would have explained, pleaded, encouraged, warned, comforted, and coached him through his own discomfort. But she had learned something. Some people will let you carry the language of their healing while they carry none of the weight. Rachel was done being the narrator of Marcus's recovery. Months later, if you asked Rachel whether she forgave him, she would not give you a clean answer. She would say forgiveness was not one decision. It was a series of decisions that changed depending on the day, the memory, the trigger, the honesty, and the fruit. She forgave the 10-year-old boy who saw things he should not have seen. She had compassion for the teenager who learned to disappear into fantasy because real life made him feel small. She even had compassion for the man who felt ashamed of his body, his fear, his failure, and his inability to lead. But compassion did not erase consequence. And forgiveness did not require Rachel to keep sleeping beside deception. That was the part she wished someone had told her earlier. You can understand someone's wound and still refuse to keep being wounded by it. Rachel and Marcus did not get the easy ending. They did not renew vows on a beach with soft music and matching linen outfits. They did not become a testimony people could package neatly and clap for. Their ending, at least for that season, was quieter. Separate rooms, separate counseling, joint counseling, difficult conversations. Marcus attended a recovery group on some days with real intention, and on other days because he understood Rachel was no longer moved by words alone. She was watching for consistency, not performance. There were days Rachel felt hopeful. There were also days she prayed in fragments, in the car, in the shower, while folding towels. Sometimes the prayer was only, "Help." Sometimes it was, "Show me what's true." Sometimes it was nothing but tears and silence. But Rachel began to understand that prayer was not always about having the right words. Sometimes prayer was the place where she stopped performing strength and admitted she needed it. There were also days she looked at apartments online. There were days Marcus apologized with real tears. There were days when an apology felt like another form of exhaustion. But Rachel was no longer begging. That was the peace, not the absence of pain, the absence of begging. One evening, she sat alone in the guest room with her phone in her hand, searching for words she did not have. Rachel opened ChatGPT and typed, "Can you write me a prayer for my marriage? I feel rejected, confused, angry, and tired, and I don't know how to really pray." It gave her a simple prayer and included some scriptures about peace, wisdom, strength, endurance, and having a sound mind. She saved it in her notes and read it every night. Sometimes she believed every word. Sometimes she barely believed any of it because of how she felt. But night after night, those words gave her something to hold on to until her own voice became strong again. A few nights later, after reading that prayer again, Rachel opened her notebook and wrote some things that came to her. "I can love him and still choose the truth." She stared at it for a long time because it felt both freeing and heartbreaking. Then she added another sentence. "I can have rejection issues and still recognize rejection." That one made her cry. Because for the first time, Rachel was learning how to hold two truths at once. Marcus's addiction was not proof that she was unworthy or insufficient, and her old wounds did not mean she had to ignore the new ones. Healing did not mean blaming Marcus for every ache inside her, but it also did not mean excusing him because she had pain from her past. Rachel had work to do. Marcus had work to do. And for the first time in their marriage, Rachel stopped carrying both assignments. In her individual sessions, Rachel started facing the part of herself that had been bleeding long before Marcus ever disappointed her. She had to admit that his rejection touched something old in her, something that made her want to prove she was worth choosing, instead of simply knowing she was. That work did not excuse Marcus. It did not erase the lies. It did not make the loneliness less real. But it helped Rachel stop confusing his addiction with her self-worth. And maybe that is where Rachel's story really began to shift. Not when Marcus confessed, not when counseling exposed the truth, not when she finally understood the addiction, but when she stopped using his brokenness to avoid facing her own. Rachel did not know what would happen to her marriage. She did not know if Marcus would choose to continue in his process. She did not know if the man who had spent years hiding from her would ever learn how to fully stand in front of her, honest and uncovered. She did not know if their love would be rebuilt, or if one day she would have to accept that some people can love you and still refuse to heal. But Rachel knew what had happened to her. She had stopped disappearing. She had stopped using Marcus's addiction as the only explanation for the ache inside her. His choices had wounded her, yes. His secrecy had broken trust, yes. His rejection had left marks she could not pretend away. But Rachel was finally brave enough to admit that some of the brokenness she carried had been there before him. And for the first time, she was not ashamed to face it. She was learning how to love herself without making Marcus's desire the proof of her worth. She was learning how to pray without perfect words. She was learning how to stay soft without staying silent. She was learning how to love her husband without losing herself in the process. And maybe that was the quiet grace in all of it. Not that everything was fixed. Not that Marcus was instantly free from what had held him since he was 10 years old. Not that Rachel suddenly had all the answers. But somewhere between counseling, hard truth, uncomfortable prayers, and silent nights in the guest room, Rachel found something she did not know she had lost: herself. So she gave Marcus room to heal, not room to lie, not room to hide, not room to keep breaking her while calling it struggle, but room to do the work that only he could choose to do. And she gave herself room too. Room to breathe. Room to heal. Room to pray. Room to feel beautiful again without needing him to confirm it. Room to stop begging for a love that should have never required her to abandon herself. That night, when Rachel turned off the lamp in the guest room, she did not feel rejected by the silence. She listened to it, and for the first time in a long time, the silence did not sound empty. It sounded like mercy. It sounded like a woman finally coming back to herself. It sounded like God answering a prayer she barely knew how to pray. Not by fixing everything overnight, but by giving her enough strength to stop disappearing while she waited. And maybe that is the part that stays with you. Sometimes the miracle is not that the marriage instantly changes. Sometimes the miracle is that the woman inside the marriage finally does. And once Rachel saw herself clearly, she could no longer go back to being unseen. Before you leave this story, take a moment and ask yourself, have you ever used someone else's brokenness to avoid facing your own? Have you ever stayed silent so long that silence started feeling normal? Have you ever confused being chosen by someone else with knowing your own worth? Rachel's story may not be your exact story, but maybe there is something in it that sounds familiar. Maybe it is the loneliness. Maybe it is the secrecy. Maybe it is the exhaustion of loving someone while also trying not to lose yourself. And if this story made you think of someone who needs courage, clarity, or the strength to face a hard truth, share it with them. Sometimes one story can give someone the language they did not know they needed. Also, comment below if you have endured the same issue or similar to be an encouragement to someone else. Thank you for listening to Whispers of Grace Stories. Please like, comment, subscribe, and turn on all notifications. A new story is released every Thursday. Until the next story, give yourself permission to face the truth, make room to heal, and stop disappearing in places where you were meant to be seen.